Well, it's been 80 days since the checkered flag fell in Abu Dhabi. McLaren and Max Verstappen crowned champions, but now the slate is wiped clean. And today we have had cars on track. Yes, Formula One is well and truly back for 2025. And here is everything we learned on day one of testing. Alongside me to look at it in detail, Barretto and Alex Brundle. Guys, how are you? Back here in Bahrain for testing. I am so excited to be back in the paddock.
I love being back in Bahrain. It just feels like this is the right place to start testing for the year ahead. And I know we've only got 3 days of running, but we've been away, like you said, for 2 months or so, not seen a Formula One car on track. And I'm not sure how much I learned for the pecking order today, but I felt like we made some progress at least.
It's felt very winter testing, hasn't it?
Yes.
Very, very windy out there. Even a little bit of rain in the air for a moment late on in the day. Extremely, unseasonably, even for winter here in Bahrain, cold. So the teams had a lot to work with in some ways to make sure that they get their cars absolutely right, but also a lot of challenges as well to get consistent data out of this first day.
It's not got much above 15 degrees Celsius all day. As you said, we had some rain. Wind was gusting as well. That caused a few issues out on track. But actually, the predominant issue for today was a power cut. So we are filming this pretty late on in the evening, about an hour or so later than perhaps we should have been, because we had an extra hour of running to compensate for the time lost due to a power cut. I've never seen that a circuit before, and Bahrain International Circuit tried to remedy the situation as quickly as they could, didn't they? But it was about an hour we lost.
Yeah, but good thing about this circuit is they've got floodlights, so actually you're not fighting the sun setting effectively. You can run on into the night, and that's why we're here coming up to midnight now. I'm joking, it's not that late, but it's just good that the team's got that extra hour, because you only get 3 days of running. And we're hearing Lewis Hamilton coming into this season talking about the lack of testing he's going to get with this Ferrari. Every lap counts out here, so to get that extra running, especially that part of the day, was really encouraging for a number of the teams.
I think the luckier thing is we're not on a noise curfew. We're right next to an Air Force base here, actually, and we can run all the way into the evening here. So many circuits around the world, if you lost that amount of time, you'd run up against a curfew for another factor. I have seen that before, but only once. Of course, if there's no power going to the marshalling system, for example, so much of the marshalling system relies on lights, and then, of course, race control in immediate connection with all of the marshals posts around the track. So the racetrack simply cannot run in the modern day without a connection to power.
No, it cannot. And so we had an hour or so red flag. We chatted to some drivers. I think commentary probably got a little bit delirious at that point as we sat through a lot of red flag action. But no, when cars got back on track, it was Lando Norris who ended the day quickest overall in the McLaren. And Alex, you were looking a lot at car characteristics today. That McLaren looked so hooked up, dialed in. It looked impressive. It kind of looked as though it simply picked up where it left off in Abu Dhabi.
When you looked at the theory of that McLaren, the lap that Lando did looked kind of how you would expect it to look. Glued to the racetrack, maximising the aerodynamic platform. All of the speed was in generating the downforce. It's a great lap from Lando. Of course, usual caveats apply of it being testing, but they'll still be feeling pretty happy to take, the top position away from the first day with a very, very clean and tidy, nicely balanced car as well, which I think is probably more of a factor even than the lap time that was delivered.
And I think that's particularly impressive for McLaren here, where Bahrain's kind of been a bogey track for them in previous years. They've never, for whatever reason, run very well. I think 6 is the best they've ever scored in a Grand Prix around here. So when you're kind of looking at testing them, who's done well, I think the very fact they had such a smooth, clear day, got the pace out of the car on a track that they've struggled with, is actually a really, really good sign for McLaren.
And they spent time in the garage early on. I think you were in the pit lane at the time, and they seemed pretty cagey about what was going on. But when we did speak to the team later on, they said it was a normal setup. It's hard to read into what the teams exactly are doing there in testing. That's part of the fun of it all, isn't it?
It's one of those moments where, it would be really easy to believe they were having a reliability problem. Engine cover off the car. They were taking the rear shrouds around the exhaust to pieces. Of course, you've got to remember in testing, they make fundamental changes that you wouldn't necessarily see over a race weekend. So you see a full torsion bar change, which involves removing effectively a slab of metal from the car and putting another one in. I think actually it shows a confidence from McLaren that they were prepared to give up that amount of track time to understand the car with greater depth. You know, there wasn't any scrabbling at all for the track time from McLaren. Impressive.
And then we saw a quite extraordinary final 5 minutes of testing. I think the only thing brighter than Lawrence Barretto's coat this evening is Lando Norris's McLaren, because it was absolutely, for the record, I really love this coat,
Thanks.
but it was absolutely covered in Flovis, and I mean covered to the point that Lando Norris had bubble wrap over the cockpit as they were spraying it all over the car to protect his helmet. The garage was covered. It was pretty extraordinary.
They did properly layer it on. Yeah, you're right. And look, I'm glad they were looking after Lando and his visor to give him a clean visor as he headed out. But I guess it talks to the confidence that Alex was talking about that the team had, that they could afford to just throw it all at it, essentially, to put the car out there and learn what they could in those final moments.
I'm amazed they did that, though.
Right.
To give the rest of the field that view of the car, and it was dripping with Flovis as it went out of the pit lane. They must have brought buckets of it in. But yeah, interesting tactic. And there will be teams poring over photos of that McLaren down the pit lane.
Well, photos were hard to come by, not necessarily out on track. I'm sure some photographers may still have been out there, but of course we capture high quality images of that car in motion. But when they came back into the pit lane, McLaren personnel poured out from the hospitality, from the garage, and surrounded that car like a human wall. And they were actually play fighting, but physically warding photographers away from the car, not to take a photo. It's the fun of testing, I guess, isn't it? But quite extraordinary scenes in the final 5 minutes of what's been an extra long day.
Yeah, I mean, normally they use screens to do that,
Yeah.
so I'm enjoying the fact that they've used people to try and do that. But yeah, look, every secret counts for as long as you can keep it. You know, when Red Bull released renders of their new car in a very dimly shot studio ahead of this race weekend, all anyone was talking about is what are they hiding. I think even if you get people guessing, it's the fun and the games of testing in this part of the year, because as the regulations have remained so stable into year 4 of this iteration, there are fewer marginal gains to be had. So I think anything you can hide for as long as possible, whether that's a couple of seconds, every bit counts.
And look, the other big story coming into today, of course, was Lewis Hamilton in that Ferrari. It was quite special images that we saw this morning of him driving a red car, the yellow helmet, going back to when he first came into Formula One. How do you think he looked out there, though? We take away the romance and the story and the Hollywood script.
All of it? Do I have to take away all of it?
Not all of it. We can keep a little smidge of the magic.
Can I say it was suddenly real? It was suddenly real to see that programme come to fruition. Ferrari looks good. It looks really quick in a straight line in both the sectors and in the limited amount of data that we've seen. Relatively compliant, perhaps missing a tiny bit of downforce in comparison to, for example, the McLaren, but in the hunt, definitely. All those top 4 teams were in the hunt when it came to the timesheets at the end of the day, weren't they?
Yeah, it's just so close to call. But just talking specifically about the programmes that Ferrari ran today, they were talking about giving Charles and Lewis exactly the same programme, and they were at pains to say they weren't chasing performance, because there was about a second, I think, on the classification between Charles and Lewis, and I think they were very much just focusing on understanding that package, and that's what we've got to keep remembering right on this day here. It's not about Lewis going and setting the timesheets alive, it's about him getting comfortable with that car. I think he did 70 laps in total. That's more than a Grand Prix distance. And it's proper testing. It's not the shakedown that, he did at Fiorano. It's not in the old 23 or 24 car. It's the new one. And I think ultimately he just needs mileage, because he's a 7-time world champion. He's got years of experience, so he just needs a bit of time in the car.
What they did do at Ferrari is pack the running in. There wasn't a lot of the sort of McLaren-style big stoppages. The car seemed to be out there relatively consistently through the day, sequences of small changes for both Charles and Lewis. So perhaps a different strategy to how they went about evaluating the car today.
Straight line speed for Ferrari was really good today. They were very, very quick, perhaps alluding to the point you made there about a lack of downforce potentially relatively to McLaren. This is going off running today, and there is so much more to unearth, and it's hard to draw many conclusions, isn't it? But Ferrari and McLaren both looking pretty good, I think we can deduce. We also had, of course, the 5 rookies and Liam Lawson. Now, define that as you will. Some saying Lawson is a rookie, it's his first full rookie season. Some saying he's done 11 Grand Prix, he's absolutely not a rookie. We'll debate that probably for at least half the season, I'd say. For now, though, let's say we've got the 5 rookies. How did they do today? How do they compare for you?
a couple of partial seasons into his career, Lawson did fine. There was a spin for him. There was a spin for Hadjar. Antonelli ended up fastest of the rookies today, for what it's worth. I think they all did a really solid job. You know, even the little moment for Lawson and Hadjar didn't dent their evaluation and performance of the car too much. If there's somebody who looked like they were, you know, a little bit cagey and perhaps overdriving the car ever so slightly, Isaac Hadjar today, behind the wheel of an RB that looked tricky to drive anyway, might be that guy. But I think a very accomplished day from a group of young drivers who, you've got to remember, have done quite a lot of time behind the wheel of this kind of race car now.
They have. I spoke to Ollie Behrman earlier. It's safe to say that Haas were doing a sort of different run plan. A lot of laps, but seemingly race running and heavier fuel, and difficult to read into actually where they sit at the moment. But Ollie Behrman very happy in the car, if a little cold.
Yeah, I think this is a really good example of why you can't read anything into the classification testing, is because Haas just piled the fuel in. So like they weren't even remotely looking at running to anywhere near performance. Not that anyone was today, but they weren't looking at that. They were looking at car stability, you know, putting the fuel in, getting the drivers very comfortable to do longer runs. So I think the very fact that when I talked to Ollie and Esteban, they actually seemed pretty happy with what they learned today, and I think that's really good for the opening day of testing, because Haas haven't always had the smoothest run in starting into this year. So yeah, I think that's overarching what I saw today. Everyone seemed happy, you know, and very rarely do you come to testing where everyone seems happy. So many laps are getting put on the board. I'm pretty sure nearly everyone by the Aston Martins, I think, did a Grand Prix distance for each driver. We just don't see that. But obviously this is, like I said, the fourth year of regulations, and I think the rookies really benefited from that. They benefited from reliable cars that the teams understood that could get set up in a really nice way, and that allowed them to get the mileage under their belts ahead of that first race in Australia.
This is a great year to be a rookie, because you're in an evolution regulation set. All the previous cars which they have the opportunity to test have at least proximity to what they're going to be racing this year. The teams are established. There are established drivers on the grid to learn from, but there are spaces in the field. So, you know, if you're going to be an F1 rookie, the very last year of a regulation set with everything quite stable and a car to have a go in, it is a good place to start.
F2 champion Bortoleto getting a good job in for Sauber, and they obviously need to kick on for this season ahead of the new regs, of course, and Audi coming in 2026 as well. Reliability, I think, and how the teams, the times are conforming are two of the big headlines from today for me. Any final other business that stood out to you?
Yeah, I think Red Bull, slightly anonymous today in some ways.
You haven't even mentioned Max Verstappen,
the
four-time world champion.
They're working through their programme. There was one moment where it fired some smoke into the garage. I think it was probably just dumping some oil through the engine as it fired back up. No big deal. But it looked like it had a couple of tendencies they might want to iron out pretty quick all around the circuit. I think, you know, when you look down the laps that all of the teams did and then run across the sectors in general, which is all you can really do in testing, the Red Bull looked a good all-rounder today. But yeah, pounding the laps in a car which looks so much like the car of last year, that it's hard to discern the clear developments they've made under the surface.
Is that part of the game plan, Lawrence, to just stay under the radar until we get to Melbourne and we begin to see the true potential in that Red Bull?
I mean, I think that's what a lot of people thought when they released these imageries, and why there's a lot of chatter that the car looks so similar to 2024. But Christian, talking in the press conference today, was like, no, this car fundamentally is going to be what we're going to have at the first race. So they're not hiding things. It might just be the case that he talks about all the surfaces being new, as you would expect. You can make minor tweaks, but who's to say they're not just going to save a little bit of cash and put that focus into 2026 when you can make that big step? And they will obviously know from their telemetry data how far they are off relative to Ferrari and McLaren towards the back end of last year. They'll know how much they've got to do to this package, how much they've got to spend to maybe haul themselves back in, and you've got to probably weigh up the law of averages. What's the best thing to say? That's speculation, but that could be a reason why that car is looking very similar, and we will see that play out if that is the case in the first couple of races, because they just won't be at the races to that extent.
Yeah, we'll see. There is so much left to unearth, not just here in testing, but through the course of the season. And of course, we've got the flexi-wing rule coming in Spain as well. One final bit of news from the day, is that the Motorsport Council has declared that the Monaco Grand Prix will now be a mandated 2-stop Grand Prix to ensure the spectacle of the race. Much debate in commentary on that today, and I'm sure it will continue throughout the weekend. Not a weekend, it's a week of testing throughout the next 2 days, anyway, of testing. From us all here, thanks very much, guys, for that. We'll be back for what we learned on day 2 of testing tomorrow. Thanks for watching. We'll see you then.